Okie dokie. Good morning, everyone. Oh, this is a responsive crowd. I like it. My name's Naomi Brockwell. I run a channel that aims to give people back self-sovereignty. It's focused on financial sovereignty and data sovereignty. So a lot of tips about privacy, a lot of tips about how to reclaim control of your money. And I'm a firm believer that we can reclaim a lot of our freedom right now just by learning about the technology around us that enables this. So there's a lot of talks about political activism, a lot of talks about all of these different tools that you could be using in your Liberty arsenal. And my tool that I'm going to be teaching you is that there's a lot of technology around you that you're probably not aware of that lets you carve out a private space in your digital life, a free space in your digital life. So I'm going to try and walk you through some of those tools. My talk today is focused on certain kinds of, it's focused on privacy today, and it's focused on digital exhaust that you guys may be leaving behind that you're not aware of. And I just want to give you some tips for how to be more private in your digital life. So I'll get started. So, now, if you want to dramatically improve your privacy in the digital age, there are a lot of things that you can do, and it may not seem like it because you're probably surrounded by people who say things like privacy is dead, or the only way you can achieve privacy is to throw out your digital devices. And not only is this rhetoric disempowering, but it's also incorrect. There are lots of things that you could be doing to reclaim your privacy online. So, the vast majority let me click through these. Where do I point? That's where I point. All right. The vast majority of the data that is collected about you is done through your own voluntary choices. And that is a big thing to keep in mind. So if you just make better choices, it means that you can reclaim a lot of your privacy. So for example, choosing better email providers, not ones that are reading all of your personal information. Choosing to use SMS is a terrible idea because it's a completely non-private messaging system instead of using secure communication, something like Signal. Letting websites and advertising companies and data brokers track you all over the internet by not using private browsers and private search engines. All it takes is you to just make simple switches over to better choices. Suddenly you're reclaiming like a huge percentage of your privacy. If you think about how governments around the world are collecting data, it's not that they have their own trackers and infrastructure laid out. No, they just go to Google and say, hey, Google, what have you collected? Hey, Facebook, what have you collected? So if you are being more private in your choices, there is no silo of information that they can draw from. And also these companies, they're not doing great things with your data either. They're selling it to all kinds of people. They're quite happy to hand this stuff over to bounty hunters and investigators and whoever else may want to target you. All of this stuff is available and purchasable. So you should be mindful that you're putting a lot of data out there that is very useful and can be used for nefarious purposes. So at last year's conference, I gave a talk about some of the small changes that you can make in your life that will have a huge impact on your digital privacy. And we covered private browsers, search engines, VPNs, email providers, private messaging apps. And that presentation is available on our channel. We also turned it into an ebook where we dive further into the details about all of those things. But today I want to do a follow-up on that talk, and I want to explore the next steps that you can take to rein in your digital exhaust that you're leaving behind you in your digital life. So you can think about this talk, let's call it Privacy 102. It's like the next thing that you can do. So I'm going to focus on three main topics. The first is your cell phone number. I hear Joelle has been talking about the talk this morning, telling everyone your phone is spying on you. Did you know? You want to learn more? Watch Naomi's talk. So thank you, Joelle. You'll get your cut afterwards. But it's true. Your phone is a giant tracking device in your pocket. But I'm going to be focused specifically on your phone number, not on the apps on your phone, not on GPS, not on all of the myriad tracking tools inside your phone. I'm going to talk about your phone number itself because I think it's overlooked. Now, you've probably had your phone number for decades at this point. It's become associated with you like a social security number at this stage. And every data brokerage company knows it. It's all over the dark web in countless data breaches. We'll go into the implications of that during the talk. And I'm going to explain why your cell number is possibly one of the absolute worst identifiers that you want roaming out there in this treasure trove of data breaches and collections. But I will also teach you how to clean up your phone situation now that the cat's already out of the bag and everyone already knows your number. So the next thing we're going to talk about is email. It's another unique identifier we hand out to everyone, and it is also terrible for your privacy that you do that. So you don't have to hand out your email to everyone you interact with. I will give you some tips for a much more private posture that you can integrate into your life. We'll go over the best strategies for siloing activities or stopping all your on activities from being siphoned up, aggregated together, and used against you. And I know it's like, your data's being used against you. And most of you are like, my data's not being used against me. I'm like, why is anyone interested in me? So I will actually explain why your data is being used against you in ways that you don't even realize. Now, as always, we're going to, the final area we're going to talk about is home security, home network security, and DNS. Is that like a big mind explosion for a lot of people? Who's even thought of DNS? Who knows what DNS is? We cherry-picked this audience. You guys have probably all got your ridiculously handcrafted artisanal router. Well, I will show you how to create your own artisanal router in this speech. So, as always, we have deep dive tutorials on all of this on our channel. If any of this sparks an interest and you're like, yeah, that sounds like something that I want to get moving on and set up in my life, then you can just dive into that or reach out to me for any questions. Always happy to help. So let's start off by looking at your phone number. All right, to preface this, there are a million ways that you can go about improving your privacy setup with your phone. I'm going to walk you through just one, as I said, focused on your cell number. And if you want to dive more into this rabbit hole, Michael Basil is a really respected privacy expert. He's just put out this deep dive for extreme privacy. So if you don't want to just stop at like the first step, privacy 102, and you want to go to like privacy 70 million, because that's a number, then check out this. It's super in depth. It's really awesome stuff. So the approach that I'm going to lay out today, it is based on his techniques and his recommendations, but you can think of it like a lightweight version. We're not going to go too extreme on all of this. I'm going to give you tips that are achievable for the average person, that are not going to overwhelm you, and they're not just achievable, but they're desirable for the average person. I really encourage you to implement these things because I think they're tremendously important. But if you want to go into the rabbit hole, Michael is a great person to follow. So, Michael Basil. So, on the side, can't you read it? It says it all the way there. Like 3 pixels for his name. So Michael Basil, and it's called Extreme Privacy. It's on his website. So, for your phone setup, I advise the following. You're going to get a new SIM card. It's going to be prepaid. It's going to be purchased anonymously with cash. And you're not ever going to use this new SIM for any calls or messages. And most of you are like, how am I going to use my phone? And we'll get to that. Going forward, you're only going to use a VoIP number for all of your texting and calling and not your cell number. And I will explain why. There is a very important reason. So SIM-based numbers ping cell towers in order to operate. Your phone provider needs to know how to route calls to you, but you're moving around. So your phone contacts cell sites closest to you as you physically move through the network. Now, a cell site is a location where radio equipment and antennas are placed in order to provide wireless communication, coverage to a specific area. And then your phone is going to contact the closest cell site with the strongest signal and basically tell them, hi, I'm here. If you need to get a call to me, you just send it, through this cell site. And as you move on, you'll get to the next closest cell site and your phone will shout out, hey, I'm here, just letting you know this is exactly where I am if you need to send me a message. Now, a cell, if you hear the term cell, it refers to like the coverage for that particular area within the cellular network. Now, obviously, a cellular network knows where you physically are at all times because they have to. That's how the system works. So that means, if I go to Napa Valley with my phone and I'm with the Verizon network, Verizon will make a little notation in a database somewhere, and then will say where I physically am and what cells are serving me. Now, here are the specifics of what happens, because I think it helps for you to really conceptualize. A lot of this stuff is kind of like abstract. It's like, yeah, my cell knows where I am. You know, what does this mean? So I just want to get specific so that you can really conceptualize this. So in order for a call to get to you, it needs to go to something called a mobile switching station, which is basically the landing point for that telephone call. Now, a mobile switching center is the thing that sits between the public switch telephone network and the radio network. So you've got this mobile switching center in the middle there. And it's a global network of interconnected, the public switch telephone network is a global network of interconnected telephone networks that allows people to make voice calls to each other. And then the radio network is what enables phones to wirelessly communicate with each other. Now, this mobile switching center sits between them, and it serves as the geographical area that you're in, right? So every mobile switching center has what's called a visitor location registry, which is basically a registry that says, okay, your phone is on my list of phones that I'm handling right now. Now, the visitor location registry reports that list to something called a home location registry. And the home location registry is a sort of master subscriber database for mobile operators. There's a lot of terms here. Really hope you're taking notes, because there's going to be a test at the end. So just like write those down. Now, the home location register keeps a record of the following, just so you're understanding the data that they're collecting. They have the IMSI, which is the International Mobile Subscriber Identity. That's the code that is uniquely assigned to every SIM card. And then they also have the mobile phone associated with that IMSI in their collection. They have which mobile switching center and which visitor location registry is serving a subscriber at any given moment. I was like, okay, what does that mean? Well, I mean, in theory, it means that your cell number is searchable in some database along with your location. So who is meant to have access to this information? Again, in theory, only your mobile network operator. So like Verizon, they're the only ones who really are meant to have access to this registry. Let's look at who does. All right. So they sell your data to everyone. It's ridiculous. They're just selling this data. They have a long history of selling your location data. Like if I was like, hey, Sarah, want to know where you are right now? I could find a way to just buy this location data. Isn't that terrifying? It's a little bit terrifying. And who do they give it to? Do they have like a filtering system where it's like, well, I'll only give it to really good people? Well, Vice did a report where they gave a bounty hunter $300 and was like, well, can you find my location? They're like, yeah, I'll just get it from these registries that exist. So, this is actually a little bit concerning, right? If you're thinking, well, I'm being stealthy and I'm covering my search tracks, but you're walking around connecting to cell towers, you're not at all. Now, they have promised to stop. There's been pushback. Obviously, no one wants this. And every time an article comes out, they're like, we're really sorry. But then they just keep doing it. And why do they do it? Because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. They make a ton of money from this stuff. Now, it's not just the cell providers that have been shown to happily share this data. There are commercial services that seem to have access to the HLR that will do these lookups for you. They will tell you the last mobile switch network that someone's phone connected to. There's services like number portability lookup. People can just use these services. So anyone really can use these commercial services, find out people's location. So if you have a stalker, you have a scary ex-partner, you have an employer who wants to invade your privacy, you have, a government entity has many ways to find your location, but all of these entities can find out your location, get access to it. And now these commercial services generally only give like the town or county that someone is in. It's not super granular, but the mobile network operators can know someone's location within a few meters. It's pretty granular because they're triangulating signals across all the different cell towers, so they're pretty accurate with where you are. Let's say that the mobile operator has really strict security measures in place, stopping anyone getting access to data. We know that's not true. They're giving it to anyone. But let's play this hypothetical. Let's say, no, they're really strict. Again, all it takes is one rogue employee within this mobile operators to want to make a few bucks, and they do it all the time. So what is the solution? Hear me out. Just wait till I finish the sentence, because most of you are going to be like, you're an idiot. If no one has your cell number, you can't use it to search for you in these databases, right? Now, if companies don't have your cell on file, they can't use it to buy location data about you. Hackers can't search for countless data breaches online, find your cell number, and use that to find your location. Like, if you don't give your cell number to anyone, this system can't be used to track you. So how do people call you and message you? Use a VoIP number. Like, now that we have the internet, we actually don't need cell numbers anymore. So VoIP does not use cell towers. It uses the internet. So it's completely disconnected from the cell towers, even if you're using a cell tower for internet data. So, I mean, we all want to get calls wherever we are, right? We don't just want to be in our home when we're on Wi-Fi, but your VoIP number doesn't get associated with this connection. So VoIP is a very interesting privacy tool. So instead of using your normal phone app to make calls and messages on your phone, you just download a VoIP app and that will do these things for you. Now, this VoIP number, in practice, it will work exactly the same way as a normal number. Your phone will ring when someone tries to contact you. You will get notifications when someone messages you, but your phone's delivering all of these via the internet. It is a very important distinction. Now, just so you understand the technical details of how a VoIP call gets to you, the network still needs to find you in order to route calls to you. But instead of using the circuit switch telephone network, it uses the packet switch data network. So your VoIP application will periodically register with a server at a known IP address. And that's how servers notify your phone in order to route that call to you. So they do have an IP address that could potentially map your geographical location, but you can use a VPN to mask your IP address. You can't use a VPN to mask your cell tower location. That is the fundamental difference here, that VoIP just provides a far more private posture for communications. It's a complicated way of saying don't give anyone your cell number because it can be used to find your location. Instead, give people a VoIP number because this can't be used to find your location. Seems like a pretty good change to make in your life. Now, this isn't just a tip for people who are privacy extremists. We're all being targeted for location data, and I think we need to realize that. But we don't have to hand this data over. And it's super easy to just download a VoIP app on your phone, give people that number instead, and the difference in your privacy is pretty extreme. So the next step, like, I just want to walk you through practically what do we do now then? Like, my mobile number's out there. Do I just cut it off? Do I cancel my accounts? Like, it's out there. I'm carrying it around with me. So you don't want to lose access to that number that has been associated with you for a long time. But that number is very public for all of you at this stage, even if you think it's not. Absolutely is. If you ever given your number to a doctor's office with your real name, it's in some data breach somewhere. That number is very searchable and very public. So what you're going to do is you're going to port that number to a VoIP provider. Just like you can port numbers within cell providers, go from Verizon to AT&T, you can port an AT&T number to a VoIP provider. Now, you will still have access to that number, but it can no longer be used for tracking, which is great. And there are lots of VoIP services that you could choose. So MySudo is a great option. We're going to dive into the details of that. There are more complicated services you could use, like Twilio. If you want to dive more into that world, again, I recommend you look at Michael Basil's rundown. Twilio gets super complicated, so I would start in the shallow end. Now, again, don't shout at me. Google Voice is actually a great option for this because it's just $20 to transfer a number, and you get to keep that number forever with no ongoing cost. The reason why I'm okay suggesting this, if you've watched my channel, you know that I'm always like, never use Google. So if you're using SMS, it's a completely insecure protocol anyway. So this number that you're porting over to a VoIP provider is still SMS. It's completely insecure anyway. Let's not have some delusions about porting this number to a VoIP provider. Suddenly I have privacy. No, those packets are completely interceptable. They're not encrypted. I mean, it's trivial to get access to your text messages. So if you're using SMS, just know that. Also, transferring your number from a cell provider to Google actually doesn't worsen your privacy because the cell provider was stealing all your information too and selling it. So it's, the trade-off, there's really not one. That's why I think Google Voice is a totally fine option. Now, the next step, once your old number has been ported to VoIP, you should stop using it. So that number already has so much personal baggage tied to it because you've given it to everyone. You should stop giving it to anyone going forward. And instead, you should start giving them VoIP numbers. And I say numbers because I think you should have many. So let's talk about VoIP and how to set that up. The app that I mentioned earlier that I recommend is MySudo. For $15 a month, which is way cheaper than my existing cell plan, by the way, I get 9 different VoIP numbers. And I use those numbers to silo activities. So I'll have one number for just purchases that I make, another one for close family and friends, another one for work. I keep these distinct. And that's great because if I give my number to, a florist and they decide to sell my data, suddenly they don't have the same number that I'm using to talk with the government, or to the doctor's office or to anything that's personal. So it's important to keep your activities siloed. Now, when you choose your number, let's see. Yeah. When you initially choose your numbers, you can actually specify which area code you want with your number, and they actually do offer international numbers as well. So it's a really interesting service that I recommend you dive into. One thing to keep in mind with MySudo is they're really focused on privacy, which is great. They're a great company for that. So messages and calls between MySudo users are all end-to-end encrypted, but as we all know in this room, because we probably all use encrypted tools, if you lose access to your account, they cannot give you back that access because they don't have that access. It's end-to-end encrypted when you're doing it between users. So let me clarify, because I know I just said SMS is not secure, it's all interceptable. So this is a VoIP service that is using the SMS protocol if you choose, or you could also use your same number to message other users within the MySudo ecosystem. If you're talking to other MySudo users, that's when it's secure, just so that we got that clarified. So highly recommend you back up your phone locally so that you don't ever lose access to any of these numbers. Now, the other thing to be aware of when using VoIP is that there are some services that will refuse to support VoIP numbers. I'm sure we've all had that issue where we'll put in a number and they'll say, no, give us a real one. So what are the reasons why they're telling us to give us a real one? It's actually kind of interesting. So first of all, my solution to this is I just use a prepaid SIM number, and then once I've used that cell-based number, I port it to VoIP. So I will, if Twitter is you have to use a cell number, it's cool. I'll get a prepaid SIM number that is a cell number. I'll give them that. They'll say, great, this is legitimate. And then I port it to VoIP. Now, the thing is that these companies, after you port these, you put these numbers in, they're not checking it afterwards. So that VoIP number will just stay on my account now. Now, I also time this so that I can actually make use of that SIM for the data first. So I'll buy a prepaid SIM. I will use the data on it so that I can get internet wherever. When it comes to expire, instead of renewing and getting more credit, I will let it expire. And just before it expires, I will port that number. And just before I port it, I will use that number for any account signups that I need. For things that won't accept VoIP numbers, I'll just use this cell number. So it's this also gives me ongoing access to real cell numbers if I need it, just letting these SIMs expire. In terms of the functional difference between a VoIP number and a cell number, when it comes to voice calls, there is no real functional difference at all. They work pretty much the same way, and there's no reason for a company to not accept a VoIP number other than they just don't like it. And companies don't like it because there is more privacy. It's harder to really KYC someone if they don't have cell towers tracking their every location. They know where you live, all of that. A lot of companies just don't like them. But when it comes to text messages, there is a functional difference, and this is important. So messaging protocols operate as a parallel system to voice calls, and not all VoIP providers support all of the protocols. So there are also some third parties that will manage inbound and outbound messages for things like short codes and will block certain numbers. So basically what happens when numbers are provisioned, you have the FCC who's I'm going to give the United States a bunch of numbers they're allowed to use. And so they give it to these cell number provisioners I think I'm going to screw it up, T-Mobile, definitely a provisioner, but these large companies, they'll give it to them, and then either T-Mobile will then go on and sublet that to a million other companies, or they will give it directly to consumers. And what happens when they batch those numbers is FCC will kind of mark them and say this is a cell number, or they'll give it to a VoIP provisioner and they'll say, here is a batch of 1,000 numbers, these are VoIP numbers. So that's how people are kind of telling the difference. But on top of that, for SMS, there is functional difference between those. Now, this can be handled. So some VoIP providers actually handle this better than others. So for example, my sudo has been actively expanding their phone number provider footprint to find numbers that have high quality and support for areas like short codes and receiving 2FA. So for example, that all sounds probably like a lot of jargon. Basically, my sudo has to get their numbers from somewhere. They're not a number provisioner, so they're subletting that number. They're a reseller. So they're just going to choose a wider footprint of numbers. Basically, it's up to the people who initially provision the numbers to figure out what they're actually going to support. So what my sudo does is they expand their footprint so they can find more of those initial provisioners so that they can get better quality numbers, so there's more likely that you're going to be able to have all the full functionality. So they've been exploring a wider range of VoIP number provisioners. It will give users a higher success rate with receiving short codes, etc. But I actually haven't had any issue with these codes and things. Most of the companies that say, we want to send you a text, and if I'm like, well, I don't know whether I'll get the text, they also tend to give you an option to say, get a call instead. You're going to receive that call just fine. Functionally, VoIP, cell numbers, exactly the same. So opt for the call whenever possible. But also, if you really do have an issue, so just buy a prepaid SIM, and I highly recommend that. I think we use short codes very few times in our lives. It's not a huge issue for the amount of privacy that you're getting just relying on VoIP. I have prepaid cell numbers that I use, but I don't keep them in my phone, because if I keep that in my phone and I'm wandering around, it's just tracking my location everywhere. I don't want that location data out there. So I will have things that I will occasionally put in if I need that functionality, but I actually don't. I haven't had an issue. So the final thought, the thing I want to mention is what using VoIP instead of cell does and doesn't protect you against. And I think that that's important to understand. So giving people a VoIP number will stop these companies that you associate with who buy your data, the people who sell your data. It will stop all of these people looking up that number to find your location, and using multiple VoIP numbers will stop certain activities of yours being correlated together, which is great. It just really increases your privacy stance. Here's what it will not protect against. So if you haven't given your cell number to anyone, but you're still using your cell inside your house, and if you're being targeted by a motivated and powerful actor, like a state actor, of course they could subpoena a cell company and see phones being used in your location. They're like, okay, well, that's the IMSI associated with that phone, and that's the number. They can figure out all that information. That is a really high threat model. And even if this does apply to you, and you because I know people who still use this system and they're higher targeted people, you still just don't, you just don't want your location data out there because you like privacy. You can just turn off your cell service before you get home, or you could just remove your SIM before you get home. That actually stops all of that. If there's no way for them to triangulate, she always spends a lot of time at this location. Again, that's still a good privacy posture. So highly recommend you look into VoIP, just explore it. It's super easy, and honestly, the difference in privacy is huge. Let's look at email. Email is one of those other major unique identifiers that we use in our lives. We give them to everyone. Who here has had an email address they've had for over a decade? Everyone. There's one person who didn't put their hand up. I don't know what you're doing, but it's great. Keep that up. So we generally hand out the same identifier to everyone we interact with without a thought. We give it to the online stores, we associate it with our online accounts, we give it to the doctor's office, we give it to work colleagues, government agencies, newsletter sign-ups, and you'd be surprised how many of these people share this data or sell it. It's actually a little overwhelming. So when you buy something online or use a service online, read their terms of service. Most of them are saying, yes, we share information with third parties. And they'll just say, like, trusted third parties. Like, what does that even mean? Just throwing the word trusted makes us feel better about the fact that they're literally selling our data and information about our online activities. So your bank is another one that you probably didn't realize, is just selling. They're allowed. They're completely allowed to sell information about you. It's totally legal to sell information about your banking activities. And some of the larger banks are really notorious for this, so watch out who you're banking with. Your utilities provider, your ISP, all of these entities, they're selling your home address and your phone number and your activities and all of this. It's all out there. It's egregious. So by this stage, your primary email address is very public knowledge, and it's tied together neatly with all of the information aggregated and inferred from these activities that you've tied the email to. So every new activity you do, when you hand over the same email address, more and more data is being added to profiles about you, and that's just being sold in this giant marketing world. And this world is a monster, right? The data brokerage and marketing world is an absolute monster. Don't underestimate how sophisticated data analysis is these days and how much money companies are making from this data. You know, it's used not just to target your consumer choices, because I remember doing an interview, Stossel was interviewing Snowden when I was a producer for him, and he was like, but what's this data going to be used for? It's just going to buy a better pair of shoes. And I completely respect that sentiment, because that's what a lot of us think. We're just like, it's just going to get us to buy something, right? People want to make money. There are so many ways people can make money from your data. You know, it's not just targeting consumer choices. It's used to target you with specific videos and articles to try to influence you to think in a certain way, to try and hate certain groups because you think that they're hating you. Like, we are so easily manipulatable. And the better a company knows you, the more effective these campaigns are. So people are putting a lot of resources into trying to get you to think a certain way. You should be mindful of that. You should protect your data so that they know less about you. These things are less effective. You can retain independence of mind. And let's not forget, there's government surveillance as well. This data gives governments around the world not just our own insight into our personal lives, our interests, our beliefs, our associations, our activism, all of that. It can be used to track our movements, monitor communications, target us for all kinds of things, or used for a larger plan. And once this data is out there and it's associated with us, we can't take it back. So even if it all seems benign, and we're all law-abiding citizens now, it's worth remembering that laws may change, but your data is forever. Laws may change tomorrow, and suddenly yesterday you were a completely law-abiding citizen. Well, crypto's outlawed now. They're gonna, find out who's been twitting about all of that. This data is forever, and we just don't know how it's going to be used in the future. We don't know what regimes are going to be in place that will have access to it. It's really worthwhile just being mindful of the data that we're putting out there. Now, the other risk of tying all of our activities together and using this unique identifier for everything we do is it makes it easier for hackers to target us with sophisticated phishing attempts. So, they can break into our accounts because they already know the email associated with our account, for example. It makes it easier for people to search for you in countless data breaches. If every account you've ever signed up for, you use the same email address, it makes it very easy to find which accounts that you are using. We don't need to be making our activities easy to associate together by giving everyone these same unique identifiers. So you should be using different email aliases or addresses for all your activities. And again, all of you are like, I'm not having 75 email addresses and email accounts. So it's actually way easier. You're overthinking it. So basically, you're going to manage everything within a single email account. I'll walk you through a good setup. Again, a million ways to do this. This is something that I would recommend. So you will have one account. I suggest you choose a privacy-focused email provider, something like ProtonMail or Tutanota. They're great. They're solid. And first of all, that's going to be like your primary. Now you're going to set up things called catch-all email addresses, and it's going to be with custom domains that you own. So a catch-all address, I'm sure a lot of you already use this technique. Who's not familiar with this or has never dived into this? So a catch-all email address basically catches all the emails sent to a specific domain, right? So if you own the domain ilovemangoes.com, you have set up a catch-all for that domain, suddenly any email people send to that account will be received in your inbox. It doesn't matter whether you created the account Naomi at ilovemangoes.com. If someone sends it to Naomi at ilovemangoes.com, you set up a catch-all and you own ilovemangoes.com, you'll get any email addressed to that domain. So it's a pretty handy technique. I recommend you have a handful of domains that some of them you never associate with your identity. I have a ton of things out there that I've never associated with my identity. So I could send someone an email, like a purchaser, info at thisisagreatroom.com, and they don't get any information about me. They don't get any personal information. They don't get my unique identifier that they can tie to other activities. So when someone asks for your email, you'll no longer give them that one unique identifier. It's the same email that you use of yours. You can instead just make up a unique address on the fly. The good thing about catch-alls is you don't have to set up any of these accounts. I don't have to be like, All right, you want my email? Give me a second. All right, so the email is, like, it's already there, and they'll get any email at your account. So you could give them, awesome conference at ilovemangoes.com, and I know that I will receive that email because I've set up a catch-all. It's a really handy tool. So it's great, first of all, for controlling spam. So being able to filter out messages that have been sent to certain addresses, or even shut off those addresses completely, is actually a really powerful tool for controlling spam or unsolicited communication. So I use that frequently. I find it much easier than targeting the spammers themselves, and every time they come in I press block. It's like, no, this email's been compromised, it's clearly been sold to some mailing list, I'll just block off the email address. So it's really handy tool. Second, it can protect you from some of the social engineering that happens online. So if there's no longer a unique identifier tying all your activities together, it's harder for someone to find specific information about it associated with your different activities. So siloing your activities with different addresses is a great privacy tool, and you should presume that all kinds of accounts of yours will be hacked in the future. All that information will end up in data breaches. But you don't need to make it easily findable. If people don't think to look at info@ilovemangoes.com for information about me, then how are they going to get that information about me? So it's obfuscation. This tool is actually pretty handy. Next, using unique email addresses actually makes it easier to see which sites are sharing your data. So if I give a flower shop the email address bettysflowers@thisismydomain.com, and suddenly I start getting emails from Spotify to that email address, Betty has probably sold my data, right? So I can just block that address now and turn it off. And then finally, using aliases and unique email addresses gives you control over which emails can actually make it to your important inbox. So I have all of my setup filtered so that if anything goes to any of my domains, it goes to a specific folder. If I want someone to actually be able to reach me, it goes to a very specific folder. And that's the only one I turn notifications on for. So I don't get bombarded all day with all of this ridiculous spam and notifications. If I want someone to contact me, I know which email address to check. It makes my life a lot more secure. It looks like you have a question, but let's keep going because we've got a lot of things that I want to go through, but also happy to answer any questions afterwards. So here are some things services that I would not recommend, because you're probably thinking there are a million ways that I could do this. Well, that would be easier. I would not recommend you use a service that filters your inbox for you. These services are handy. They learn which things are spam, which things you want to see, which ones you don't. You're literally giving them unfettered access to your inbox and all the sensitive information in it. Don't do that. It's a terrible idea. There are burner email services. They might give you a temporary address that lasts for 10 minutes. You're like, okay, I'll just use that. I'll sign up for the account. Don't use that. If anytime in the future you need access to that same address, you won't have it. Also, that might be reassigned to someone else. So if you've used that to associate your identity with something, now someone else is in control of that, that's a bad idea. So I wouldn't recommend you use temporary services that someone else might have control over in the future. There are also email services that will forward emails to you, but they will hold a copy. I don't recommend you use any service that will keep a copy of your emails. There are forwarding services, I'll mention one of them, that are good for this, email services, so it's another technique you could use. But I wouldn't recommend any of these services that stores the information. If you're having any email stored, you want it to be stored with zero access encryption. This is something that Tutornoda and Proton Mail both provide. It basically means that when the email arrives, they even put it out of their own reach. They will encrypt it with your private key so that they can't even see it in future. That means if they're subpoenaed or whatever, any existing email in their system is unintelligible to them. So that's a great thing to keep in mind. You don't want copies of your emails floating around and stored elsewhere. Now, another tool that people like is subaddressing. It's something that Gmail popularized, but something you can use with a bunch of different providers. Basically, you add a tag to the end, so it'll be, this is my email plus Amazon or whatever service you're using. And people tag this, so they're like, I want to see if they're selling my data. Few reasons why I wouldn't recommend this. The biggest problem is that the plus trick is pretty well known at this stage. A lot of websites won't even accept an email address with a plus sign in it, which is pretty outrageous if you think about it, because we're literally adding the plus sign so we can track what they do with that email. And they're telling us, no, we don't want you to be able to track what we do with our email. We're not going to allow those special characters. So it's a bit crazy. But also it's easy enough to just remove the plus part and know what your personal email address is. Again, that thing that is tying all your activities together. So I wouldn't recommend you use subaddressing. It's not as good as a catch-all. Now, you may think, like, well, this issue also applies with a catch-all, right? If I'm using at ilovemangoes.com for all my domains, can't that associate everything together? Well, there are a few ways to obfuscate this. First of all, my real identity has never been associated with ilovemangoes.com. So that's one big barrier. But yeah, sure, you could aggregate all those together. That's why I recommend you have multiple domains. And they're super cheap, honestly. So just have multiple where you can silo different activities, and it's great for obfuscation. But if you do want to go even further with obfuscation, then you can use something. Let me skip some of this. Like Simple Login. So Simple Login is an alias service that is owned by ProtonMail, and if you are a pro user of ProtonMail, you've already signed up. It's an alias service that basically allows reverse aliases generally with these catch-alls, unless you're using an email client like Thunderbird, which goes into the weeds. We're not going to talk about that now. You can't respond with a certain email address. Most of the time you don't need to. Most of the time they're sending you a thing, sending you a confirmation code, you click. So you don't generally need to respond to these. If you do need to, you can establish that email, or you can just use an email client. You can send from any address at any domain that you own. But an alias service is another alternative. I don't know why I'm pointing this because this is completely the wrong slide, but Simple Login is a service that does reverse aliases, and is another tool that I would also recommend if you wanted to go down that route. Okay. So we're going to move on from email, reverse alias, we're going to talk about home network, privacy, and security is the final thing. I know we're going real fast through all of these things, so I appreciate you guys sticking with me. So your home network is foundational to your security. So I'm going to take a moment to explain how to make it more private. The 3 concepts I want to go over. First, upgrading your hardware, firmware, and software so that your router firewall software is much safer. And second, segmenting your network so that you've got insecure devices on one network, like IoT devices, which are super easy to hack. And you've got all your important devices on another network. Finally, changing your DNS settings. It seems that we're running out of time, so I may actually just skip to DNS, but I'll give you the TLDR for the first bit. Highly recommend that you upgrade your software to use, this was an explanation of how it all works. It was really interesting. All right, these things. I recommend a Protectly device basically because it's able to run Core Boot. Core Boot is open source and it can't just be installed on everything. This is firmware. So because Protectly's been specifically designed to be able to run Core Boot, that's why I like their devices. pfSense, again, is free open source software. Highly recommend you use that as your router firewall software. It's just much more robust. You can provide granular, it provides granular changes and adjustments that you can use to make your privacy much better. And again, I gave some other tips, but we'll keep moving on. If you're interested in that, highly recommend you just dive into one of our tutorials. So that's what I would recommend for that. This is how you do it all. Change your passwords. This is a good practice. Network segmentation, the TLDR on that is, if anyone can get into your network, it puts all of the devices on that network at risk. So if you have an insecure smart thermometer sitting there and they haven't paid any attention to security, because they never do, because they do not care about security, they want to make the cheapest product possible, and security is expensive and hard, that thing is going to get hacked if someone knows that it is there. So if that device gets hacked, it makes it a lot easier for them to get access to other devices on your network. You don't want to be using the same network for all of these devices. You want your computer and your phone on one network. You want your smart thermometer on another. So I would have dived into network segmentation, but honestly, that's something that you should probably be reading and following carefully, so I wouldn't have provided much help. DNS, domain name system. Let's talk about that. Let me scroll through my million slides. All right. There we go. So we're going to talk about resolving DNS, and this is the last point that I want to make. So DNS is the lookup system. It's basically the phone book of the internet. It converts human-readable domains like google.com into something that a computer can understand. Your computer can only understand IP addresses, so this is a lookup system that will convert those. And that conversion is called resolving the DNS query. Now, this is a complicated process. It involves you talking to like every cut of the DNS hierarchy. And so a lot of us just use a middleman. A lot of us just use an upstream DNS provider. So by default, most of your upstream DNS providers, it's going to be provided by your ISP. This is terrifying news. All right, so if you think about it, let's just lay this out so you can clearly conceptualize what's happening. You have your computer that types in ilovemangoes.com, and they want to get to it. Then your resolver says, all right, you don't know how to get to it, I'll find the IP address. So your resolver says, all right, how do we find that? I can either ask all of these people myself, or I can ask an upstream resolver. It opts for asking the upstream resolver. That upstream resolver says, yeah, I'll look up ilovemangoes.com, which means that that upstream resolver knows every domain that you're visiting in order to provide you the address to get there. Your ISP is by default going to be your DNS resolver, and they sell all your data. So your ISP is literally collecting every website that you're visiting and then selling that internet activity about you. That's not great. Good news. You can actually change who your upstream provider is. It's super easy to change your DNS settings. By the way, DNS snooping is like a big tool used for surveillance as well. It's one of the go-tos, mainly because that connection isn't encrypted in the protocol. It's pretty outrageous. Everything is just sent in the clear. It doesn't just mean that governments can get access to this information. It means that anyone sniffing your traffic can get access to this information, right? So it's pretty scandalous. I recommend Quad 9. If you want to learn how to change your DNS settings, it's actually super easy. You just literally change one setting inside your portal. I recommend that you do that. If there's like a takeaway from today, just go and change those settings. I like Quad 9. They're non-profit based in Switzerland, have really great privacy rules. Switzerland has really great privacy rules. So I recommend you do that. Another great thing about Quad 9 is that although the connection to the authoritative servers, that triangle I showed you earlier, although that cannot be encrypted, your connection from your local router, your local resolver to Quad 9 can be. So you can actually obfuscate all of your queries before it gets there. Then it's mixed in with millions of other users, and then it's sent out all in one clump. So that is basically my entire talk. Cut down, and I hope that it's given you some nuggets to think about. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming, but I appreciate you sticking with me. There's a lot out there. Basically, the takeaway is there's a lot you can do to protect your privacy. So anyone who tells you privacy is dead, you have to throw out your devices, they're lying to you. That's not true. They're defeatists. They're disempowering you. There's a lot you can do. You just have to make the effort. And honestly, it's not that hard. So thank you so much. Go and enjoy your day.
No time? Yes. No, it is what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We have a couple more minutes, and then we'll have our next speaker, Karen McDonald, about 5 minutes. If you want to come back for that or go mosey around, stretch your legs. See ya.